Simp Destroyer writes.
It's men having to think and behave like slaves and soldiers, to avoid being seen as a loser and a freak of nature or the worst piece of shit in existence. Why don't men talk about their feelings and their problems as much as women do? Why do so many men just keep things to themselves until they go insane? Because society punishes any thought and behavior from men that doesn't align with being a good slave or soldier, and women are the most vocal supporters of toxic masculinity, so it's fucking absurd. This is something that is blamed entirely on the male gender, when a lot men despise this shit. I've never fucking encountered one single woman in my lifetime who wasn't a hardcore supporter of toxic masculinity. The level of deception from these women, it would be like Adolf Hitler, Heinrich Himmler and the SS, blaming Nazi ideology entirely on the lower-ranking Nazis.
There's something to be said about toxicity in men, but toxic masculinity is nothing but propaganda crudely disguised as care for men. We are at the dawn of a new age, and feminism is rapidly dwindling in influence. Feminism has run its course as they have run out of legitimate issues to address back in the 80s. The only thing that keeps coming out of their mouth is fraudulent lies aimed at debasing political discourse to aid in their power grab. They spawned so many great lies and hoodwinked untold masses. Among the constellation of unbridled guile and propaganda they spurred, there's the glass ceiling, the grape scare, and not to mention the wage gap nonsense. There was also the idea of feminization of poverty, which Hillary was using back in the 90s. She was talking nonstop of how most poor people are women, when it actually turns out most men worked and women stayed at home. That was considered poverty for women. The latest of their fraudulent lies is problematizing innocuous male behavior and labeling it toxic. In the 80s and 90s, men's movement noticed a socially accepted unrelenting attack on masculinity and men and boys. One wing of men's movement, called mytho-poetic men's movement, had an interesting reaction. They accepted rhetoric of patriarchal dominion and advanced Rousseau's ethics of romanticism as a solution. Mytho-poetic men argued most of the casualties of patriarchy were on their side. They said men were expected to be bodyguards for any women or risk being ostracized. It was men who are required to be selfless and sacrifice themselves for others. They proposed return to nature as an end to patriarchal domination. They argued modern society pressured men to be violent and unfeeling, which by all accounts, we know that's not true. Men are more peaceful than ever. Anyhow, feminists despised the mytho-poetic men's movement. Hans van Wees said that they were trying to reinvent themselves as victims. But nonetheless, these unscrupulous snaky feminists had no qualms or shame appropriating their idea when it suited them. They redefined toxic masculinity to mean a toxicity that arises out of aggrieved entitlement as men perform appropriate patriarchal gender roles, expecting a reward for their behavior and then getting nothing in return. This is gaslighting and manipulation at its finest. They put the blame on men for their failure and gave it a structuralist washing, and most importantly, absolved women, and especially the feminists, of the role they played in harming men and boys. Feminists blatantly discriminated against men in healthcare, education, military service, domestic violence, sexual assault, justice system, employment and workplace, divorce and custody and child support and alimony, and media representation. And whenever they started a movement or an advocacy group, they made sure to suffix it with "for women," and they rarely ever ratified laws, even after they have achieved their goals. The end result is a system where women predominated and subjugated men, resulting in disadvantaging and disempowering men and boys in favor of women, and all ills coming from this matriarchal system is blamed solely on the patriarchy, the system of deceased men of 18th century. Instead of being intellectually honest and call a spade, we live in a matriarchy. The feminists hoodwink people into thinking that the matriarchy is actually a patriarchy. Now the harmful effects of the matriarchal system on men is thought of as a failure of the patriarchy. Simp Destroyer, you're right.
Why don't men talk about their feelings and their problems as much as women do? Why do so many men just keep things to themselves until they go insane?
The answer is men bottle up their emotions for survival. Historically, men did not derive much value from crying to express sadness or humiliation. For most of history, they were the primary protectors, not the protected. Acceptability of crying for men has fluctuated across time and culture. In the works of the Greek writer Homer, men used to cry a lot some 3,000 years ago, and their mourning included extreme acts like lacerating one's face. As societies turned more agrarian in ancient Greek, with more need for protectors, you can see in Greek tragedy works of around 2000 years ago that crying as a man, or even as of upper-class women, was heavily stigmatized. The situation improved drastically as of today. You see men crying all the time in the TV and social media. You've probably seen the faces of all your favorite male actors crying at least once. This is why men not crying is a nothing burger that's made divisive to create bipartisanship and bolster support for feminism. You also write,
I've never fucking encountered one single woman in my lifetime who wasn't a hardcore supporter of toxic masculinity.
You'd be shocked, simp destroyer, to hear that this is the testimonial of most men. Most men I've encountered tell me that the only people who were telling them not to cry were women, while the men were more understanding and consoling. It's apparent that only women socialize and condition men to become a plowing horse protector and provider, with no concept of self or a desire for self-preservation. Your male friends would never treat you as badly as a woman. Even among the best of your best friendships, none of them expect from you a ring and a monthly allowance and a house just for being close to you, but women do. Anyway, I think this has went long enough. See you in the next video.